I was going to say morning then, it's not morning, is it? Right then, make sure you've got the space around you. Weight slightly forward, hips dropping back. Start off quite small, just get a sense for how far you can move easily, even if that's not very fast. So a minimum of effort. This is one of the sort of foundation principles that I think everything is based on. This an old Chinese principle. The Chinese term is Wu Wei, and it's often translated as non-effort or non-action. That is a poor translation. A more literal translation would be something like the effort of non-effort or the action of non-action, which is not very helpful, really. But over the years of talking to various people and things like that, it seems that it's often regarded as not an absence of effort or an absence of action, but rather a type of effort that is different to how we would normally think of it, or a type of action. And a sort of non-reactive action. So, or non-conditioned action, perhaps is a better term. We tend to respond in particular ways to particular situations for various reasons. Tai Chi sort of seeks an alternative. So in terms of the martial art, you can see it quite significantly when we do our partner work exercises and we try and push each other over. The idea being to absorb the push and not resist it. So what tends to happen is one of two things. If somebody tries to push you, you either sort of capitulate, you either just sort of allow yourself to be pushed, or on the other hand, you sort of fight back straight away. Our response in Tai Chi is different to both of those, but it's not an absence of effort. So although I'm saying to you, don't strain for the movement, that actually means that you've got time and space to put the effort into sorting out your posture, feeling where your weight is, your hips are, and so on and so forth. Just registering whether in your posture you're able to allow the passage of gravity down through your body. All of these things, whether there's actually something in your body, whether as you turn, you encounter a tightness. And how do you respond to that? I don't know if you ever, it's very common to find in martial arts classes where somebody you kind of pull a muscle, you go, and then straight away we kind of jump up and we start trying to do things without any kind of consideration. No, okay, it's okay. No, kind of resisting, just taking that time. So the effort we make and the effort we build on is perhaps different to how we might normally regard starting an exercise class or a movement class of some kind. Rather is that focusing of our attention inward, feeling the movement within the body, just assessing that movement. That in itself may begin to just expand the range of your movement, or you may want to think, well, okay, now you can begin to adjust things, to alter things, change how you're doing things, both mind and body, and gradually get that expansion of the movement. Another way of applying that principle would be that once you've begun to loosen up, and hips, backs, and shoulders are key areas to think about with that, we're left with this void almost. It's always nice and loose. There's no effort required. But again, the effort required is a different type of effort. And we use an image like moving through water, or one of the other images that we cover in Tai Chi to respond to that loosening, to build the inner strength. And the image of moving through water is perhaps a good one. Some people sometimes say, well, it's just a matter of going with the flow. But somebody once said only dead fish go with the flow. What you actually do, if you were to come to a river, say, and you decided you're going to swim across that river, you have a choice of how you do that. You could swim upstream and put a lot of effort into it, wear yourself out. You could swim across the stream in a straight line and still have to put a lot of effort into it. Or you could swim downstream and sort of angle across the river and put a lot less effort into it. You're still putting effort into it. You're doing it in a slightly different way, and you're still getting to where you want to go. So you're not just going with the flow, as the cliche says. Almost a kind of strategic thing, I suppose, a tactical thing, perhaps. And then raising your arms. And then swaying in the river. So staying with that idea of moving in water and the type of effort we would make, type of action we would engage with in order to move. In particular, I think with your arms, if you imagine, you focus on the forward movement for a little while. Imagine that you're facing into the flow of the river. So you just allow yourself to be pushed back until you're sort of going towards your heels. You don't want to fall over. So just remind yourself to sort of settle into your feet. And then you want to go forwards again against the flow. And so your arms are held back a little bit. We know instinctively not to stiffen up in our arms. And just feel the difference between those two movements. The first starts off with a going with the flow, but not to the extent that you're going to allow yourself to be pushed over. So something has to change. The second is actually deliberately moving against the flow, but in a particular way, because we know if we stiffen up, it gets harder. So we could do this for some time, but what happens after a while is our attention sort of slides off these focal points. And when we feel that's happening, you might be able to bring your attention back, but sometimes if that feels like you're having to kind of somehow force your attention back and to concentrate, that too is the wrong kind of effort. So just let your attention shift to the alternative view, which is that the flow of the river is now behind you. So it's pushing you forwards. And that's when you sort of go with the flow. And then you find a way to not fall over and to move back. So this is an exercise, we could spend a long time on this exercise, and it's valuable to do that. We wouldn't get much else done though. So it's an exercise I'd really recommend practicing to remind yourself of how we approach suppose the way I approach problems in Tai Chi. And then the third option is just to imagine that you're going against the flow of the river in each direction. You could also change the arms slightly into this position where we're holding a tray of drinks. And so we could apply all three of those images, the direction of the flow and so on, but with a bit more of an active engagement, a definite function, a definite intent in our arms and our hands. Part of which is not to spill the drinks. So encouraging not a frenetic activity with our arms and our hands, but a quiet quality as we move them. So then, bringing the hands around into the ball holding position, the cradling position, weight behind the balls of your feet, sinking down and push up. Expanding and contracting. And every now and then, just remind yourself of whatever glimpse you had of that particular way, that particular approach to moving that you hopefully you have some experience of. Just remind yourself that that's how we want to try and make all of the exercises. Then with this one, the key element is that yielding, releasing to the pull of gravity, particularly knees, hips, lower back. If you're feeling that you're tight in your shoulders or your upper back, then again, rather than just simply trying to sort of wiggle around and loosen there, try and find an alternative approach. And basically what we want to do is to allow any tightness, any stiffness, any blockage in the body to go downwards, to drain away, as it were, through our feet into the ground. And so apply yourself to what's happening in feet, knees, hips, and so on, before you try and sort of adjust anything in the upper part of your body. And then wild goose. And parting the clouds. Good. Now, back to the first of these, and in a little sequence of three, balancing the three down chair, harmonizing the three down. As always, when we do this as a sequence, if it's comfortable, for the second two, that's the wild goose and part in the clouds, let your weight come forwards and sort of roll into the balls of your feet a little bit so your heels come off the ground. And again, what we have there is an idea, we're not standing on our tiptoes. That would be a strain with the feet and the calves. And if I think, well, okay, well, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to stand on tiptoe. I kind of do this and I'm wobbling around. But rather than that, just gently forwards until I feel the heels come off the ground, the toes being pushed into the ground, and then slightly back and again. So, a kind of alternative way of performing familiar acts, really. One more round. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. As we go through the session, the exercises tend to become a little bit more complex, in some cases a bit more physically demanding. So finding that sort of specialist approach becomes trickier. And what we want to try and do, one of the things that I think is really important, is to try and retain a memory of how it can feel, which is why I started you off today with that very simple exercise of swaying in the river. But again, we can also use various images. So with this one, for instance, imagine you've got a big rubber band, you're standing on it, and what you're going to do is you're going to try and stretch it out with one arm, and then you want it to contract slowly, not just whip the arm down, but slowly controlled through. And then obviously the same thing on the other side. Because one of the attributes, I think, of this way of moving is that it encourages not just a stronger movement, but a movement with the whole of your body as one unit, not divided, this muscle or that part of the body. Even those parts of the body that aren't directly engaged in any particular movement are still engaged in the whole body, and your mind's always present there. So they're making in one way or another some kind of contribution, even if they're not sort of visibly active, shall we say. One more time. Now change. So always the same routine to start off, because to really reflect on these inner principles of Tai Chi, we want to be able to feel comfortable and confident in the movements. That comes with familiarity. At the same time, we don't want them just to become routine and mundane and things that we can do without having to really focus on them. So it's always useful to look for ideas like what I described as Wu Wei, or some other kind of inner principle to cast a light on the same movement. And in a way, that also is a reflection of Wu Wei, because there's always an inclination. You want to do different exercises. You know, can we learn this one? Can we do this one? I want to learn this. I want to learn that. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's good to learn a variety of things, but we don't want that to be the only impetus. It's not all about new routines, new movements. Sometimes it's about discovering more about something that you thought you already knew. Just one more time. And then changing. With this one, if I can get closer and somehow show it here. Watch how my arm, if you can see it, rotates from the shoulders, not just the wrist or my upper arm moving. If I keep the elbow more bent than it should be, you'll see the elbow becomes very much part of the movement. So there's a spiraling movement all the way down through my arm, from my shoulder to my fingertips. And then you can add the turn if it's comfortable. Switch sides. And again, if it's comfortable for you, add in the turn. Now rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. One more time. And stand. Good. So the sort of opening, well, I suppose the opening half of the class really is once you've gotten used to the set of movements, and you'll all be familiar with those, it's really a chance to sort of overview the whole practice. And what that may do is start questions about an exercise that you thought, well, hold on, how does that work, or something like that. So as always, do feel free to ask questions. Okay, now we're going to bear play, but we're going from this exercise here, fingertips just on that point where your arm meets your torso. There's a little valley there, a little crease there, and moving forwards. This in itself is quite an interesting exercise. I'll show you from the side again, and I'll exaggerate. You see how, you know, my rib cage opens out, the sternum, the breastbone comes forward, and my elbows go back, and then the opposite happens. Obviously, that's exaggerated. These are very subtle movements. It's a good example of where, you know, what we see is the arms going around, the elbows going around, or whatever, and what we feel is a whole load of movement in chest and upper back, ribs, and so on and so forth, maybe even further down the body. Sink your hips a little bit, and then turning as you do this. Moving your weight, coming up a little bit in the middle and then down. And then all you really need to do is just allow your hand to press down. And we're into bear play. And because of this big movement across, very aware of the energy in your back and spine. And from there, just feel the effect on all the internal organs of the lower abdomen, liver and gallbladder, stomach and spleen, intestines, kidneys. One more on each side. We're going to change into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Push down. Then instead of going across, just turn out a little bit and then push up. Here, the effort is not to swing your arms, but to feel your weight going down into the leg here and to wait for the push up. Here, wait for the push up. Feel that movement. Again, all of these things will train your awareness of what is happening in the body. And so, if you think about this one, it bears a relationship to bear play. pardon the pun. But I was thinking about Dragon plucks the stars from the sky, because there's this extension up through the body. Here, extending through the body. And it's only really at the end of all those movements with the transfer of your weight and the turn that we redirect the arms. We're not going straight up, we're going out. We're doing this familiar action of hitting the ball up in the air, guiding the hands. So there are 2 or 3 things that really turn it into a very different exercise. But hopefully without losing some of that fluidity of movement that we felt when we were doing bear play, particularly in the spine. One more time on each side. And then, once again, hands on your shoulders. Once again, this movement, turning your center, but not really moving your weight. You may find your weight moves a little bit. I mean, if it does, don't fight against it. But as much as possible, your weight 50% in each leg. Got a lot of movement in hips and back and shoulders. And this time, we're going to go into circling arms. So here, once again, you release the hands, but you're pressing forwards. Again, you turn, you just glance at this back hand out the corner of your eye. You don't want your head to be rigid. I mean, you could do this, just let your head stay still, but that puts quite a pressure on the side of the neck, and also means it's quite difficult to see what's happening behind you. Our eyes naturally scan, so too sort of concentrated a focus can actually narrow your vision down. When we see this exercise from the side, you can also appreciate, and this is true for Repulsed Monkey as well, the rhythm and the movement we get to hear. Now, the body expands, so we've got this movement pushing out. And then it contracts in, and as the hands come more or less in line with each other, we change to the expansion again. So there's a similarity between this and the wild goose. At this point, you could almost be doing the wild goose. Again, engaging the energy and the physiology, the muscles and so on, of more than just one part of the body. One more time. Good. Now, tilting your hips. So expanding on one side, contracting on the other, and then just letting that reverse. Another way of thinking of this is that your hips are going one way, the shoulders going the other. And a kind of curve through the whole of the upper body. A smooth, even curve. We don't want this to happen or this to happen or anything like that. And again, that may well mean that you're not getting very much movement, and this certainly means you shouldn't be forcing the movement. So it might just be this that you're doing, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because as always, the smaller movements are often more revealing. So just keep it, explore this space a little bit, bringing your hands together, and the wrists flex and extend. So when my shoulders go to the right, my fingers are pointing to the right, vice versa. So this, of course, is the introduction to Swimming Dragon. So now, knees bend a little bit, your hands go down underneath your belly, in between belly and solar plexus, in ribs and throat, and over the top of the head. And if you wish, it works for you, be together. Just be very careful of your knees, because with your hips moving like that, the knees are bound to move as well. Maybe see a little bit of a sideways bend in the knees, which is quite tricky. There is some scope for that in our knees. It's not a classic kind of hinge joint. But what it means is that we have to be very, very careful about how far that goes. If you're comfortable with this, you could try, in a sense, starting the movement from your knees. But if you just exploring this a little bit. But if you're going to do that, just please don't wreck your knees. And then go the other way, and be careful, of course, because you go a long way that way, you're going to end up falling over. So all these ideas, of course, lead us to an awareness of the movement itself, the energy, which is a key element in all of this. We don't want to say it just as a kind of collection of muscles and bones working together, but also feel what is moving through those muscles and bones. And again, this is crucial to really having a sense of what is going on in these in internal art, because it's so much a part of the historical culture that these movements have evolved from. And shake out. So these ideas that come from the old Chinese classics and so on and so forth are deeply embedded in traditional Chinese culture. Even now, there was a classic thing about 15, 20 years ago now, where relating to the Chinese art of geomancy, they're called feng shui. It's about kind of like how you work within an environment. And there was a court case in Hong Kong, of all places, this kind of like supposedly progressive modern banking finance sector in the world, but one bank was actually trying to sue another bank because the first bank had built a building with a sharp corner pointing at the second bank's building, which was bad feng shui. It was seen as being an actual aggressive act aimed to try and reduce the effectiveness of the second bank. I don't know what happened with the court case, but there was definitely one brewing at one point. His ideas were taken very, very seriously. And so anything that's grown out of Chinese culture, like Tai Chi and Qigong, is going to be founded, not necessarily consciously, just unconsciously, on those kind of ideas. Now, 1 foot forwards. Just transferring your weight. Raising your toes and heel. Stepping in. So here, the effort shouldn't be seen as being having to stand on one leg. Allowing your weight down, you're rooting down, aligning yourself. On the other side. And then raising your toes and your heel. And step in. And then taking a few steps either forwards or backwards. change direction if you haven't done so already. So 1 foot forwards. Let's do bird folds its wings. And again, seeing if you can feel that sort of drawing in of your sternum, chest bone, between the ribs, bringing hands forwards, and then the opening in your ribs, and a sort of withdrawing in a similar way of your spine. This is how it feels. I'm not saying that your spine, sternum are actually moving a great deal at all. So it's more about the sort of the feel of the movement, the feel of the energy, or as much about the feel of the energy as it is about anything physical. And remember, one of the goals in all of these arts is for that fluid movement to be felt all the way through our body. This time change into fisherman cast the net. And then after this one, pushing a wave. Good. And then check it out. On the other side. And change. And change. Okay, shake out. We're going to do repulse the monkey, but we're going to go into a slightly different way. Repulse the monkey really can be seen as a development of circling arms that we did earlier. This movement combined with the movement of the weight, so it has all those elements in it. And if you think about it, we developed that from this exercise, so it's also related to things like bear play and those kind of things. So what we're going to do, have your right foot forwards. It'll feel a bit odd to start off with, but you'll soon see where we're going. Have your weight about in the middle and put your hands on the shoulders here, and then just go into this movement again. Just remind yourself of this. I mean, you could do this with an up and down movement, couldn't you? Just to actively engage the rest of the body, but don't bother with that right now. And again, add in the turning movement. And what you might find is that the turning movement begins to move your weight around a little bit, not in a very specific way. So what we're going to do now is you go forwards as your left elbow comes forwards and then back. So now you're turning towards the foot that you're moving into, the direction of the foot that you're moving into. And then as before, it's now a relatively simple action to start with the left hand, to just let your left hand push out. So your hand follows your elbows follow your shoulders and the rotation in your shoulders, following, well, the movement of your weight, turning in the center of your body, and those changes and movements that we notice in spine, ribs, wherever else we notice them. That same expansion, contraction, expansion. So we sort of contract into the middle and expand as we feel our weight going into the supporting leg. So we feel the push up from the leg as part of the expansion. So let's try going into that in the other direction. Try not to rush it now that you know where it's going. So weight in the middle and elbows circling. This exercise with the elbows going around like that, I was taught it in the first ever class that I went to. So this is in 1983. I mean, my teacher did it quite a lot, and then for a long time, I didn't bother doing it. And I started doing it in some of the CET classes and realized there was a great deal going on that I'd missed for the previous 30 years or more. So again, it's not always the complicated exercises. So now turning as you do this. And as your right elbow comes over, your weight goes forwards. It feels slightly odd, doesn't it? It kind of does to me. When I was trying this out, I was thinking, it feels a bit odd. And I haven't quite sort of reconciled myself to this. But I think it's quite a useful insight into repulsing the monkey. So this time, right hand just is on the shoulder and it gets pushed out by the move. Okay, and then so a slightly different view, hopefully, that's interesting to you for the exercise with pulse in the monkey. We could probably have done that same thing. Yeah. So yeah, we could have just gone into whatever it's called, Wind-Blown to Willows. There's all sorts of ways you can sort of like connect up movements and go into this. Yeah. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Side. Part of your chest. Belly. Round your back. And your hips and buttocks. Shake out. So, brings us full circle. We come back now to just that very basic awareness, and this is typical. This is the circular nature of Tai Chi. So, embrace tiger, return to mountain. One more round. And check out. Thank you very much, as always, everybody. So enjoy the rest of your day.